It doesn't take Reed Richards level genius to figure out why Fantastic Four movies usually bomb. Let's fly into the negative zone to see the real villains who have caused their doom. When new Spider-Man and Batman movies open, they're building on decades of nostalgia and tradition. At this point, it's almost comforting to audiences to know these properties will always be fixtures of an average summer movie-going season. But the Fantastic Four simply don't have that. Even when 2015's Fantastic Four rolled around, it just reminded viewers of two previous superhero movies they didn't like, and the idea of these characters coming back sounded more like a threat. Without a favorable pre-existing legacy to build from, the Fantastic Four films are constantly pushing a boulder up a hill at the box office. In contrast, the original Guardians of the Galaxy or Iron Man movies had it easier than 2015's Fantastic Four. Sure, they didn't have positive cinematic legacies to exploit, but that also meant they didn't have any crappy films weighing them down like an anchor around their neck. And the 2025 Fantastic Four has it even worse, because now it has to deal with the stigma of 3 poorly received films rather than just 2. That's a big hill to climb. There are 2 ways to go with the superhero movie: cast superstars or cast unknowns, and let the power of the brand do the heavy lifting. In 1978, everyone in the world had heard of Superman, but nobody knew who Christopher Reeve was. The film was a blockbuster and turned Reeve overnight into a superstar. The same thing happened in 2000 with X-Men. While Halle Berry was the biggest established name in the film, it was the unknown Hugh Jackman who played the lead and actually carried the movie, becoming a household name in the process. On the other hand, the MCU went with established stars like Robert Downey Jr. and Samuel L. Jackson to anchor their universe. And DC's Dark Knight trilogy did the same, backing up Christian Bale with A-listers like Liam Neeson, Michael Caine, Anne Hathaway, and Heath Ledger. Their star power helped drive audiences to the theater. Which brings us to the Fantastic Four. From a pop culture standpoint, they were starting at almost a zero. Unlike Superman or Batman, the Fantastic Four had almost no public awareness prior to their 2005 film debut. So you might expect they would sign up a bunch of big movie stars. Instead, they went the exact opposite direction. Michael Chiklis, Johan Griffith, and Jessica Alba were all TV personalities, and while Chris Evans has gone on to become a star thanks to his role as Captain America in the MCU, at the time he was just an up-and-coming bit player. Strangely, the 2015 Fantastic Four took the same tact with the same results. Sure, Michael B. Jordan and Miles Teller would go on to become stars later in their careers, but it was no thanks to Fantastic Four. And without either the actors or the franchise itself having any star power, well, it's no wonder turning the Fantastic Four into household names has been quite a stretch. Both 21st century incarnations of Fantastic Four have suffered from tonal problems. The 2 Fantastic Four films from the 2000s aimed for a zippy, comedy-driven aesthetic, but it didn't land.
The humor's good.
It's you know, I'm here on it, but I can't do it. And the Human Torch thinks he's funnier than he is.
Funnier superhero films like Guardians of the Galaxy proved the idea could work, but for Fantastic Four, it didn't. 2015's Fantastic Four, meanwhile, was a mopey, downbeat dirge. Who would want to hang out with this miserable lot? In both cases, it felt like the creative teams once again didn't understand or trust the source material, which left them struggling to figure out what the tone should be. Perhaps they should have read the comics again, or maybe asked The Incredibles director Brad Bird for advice on how to do it right. Some of the best horror films have been made by directors with a singular artistic vision, and many of these surprisingly have been horror directors. Tim Burton, Sam Raimi, James Gunn, and others have had great success turning superhero franchises into artistically and financially successful movies. Comedy veterans taking on these projects, however, have yielded much more mixed results. Just look at barbershop director Tim Story's 2 Fantastic Four movies in the 2000s. He ended up making generic films with a vague creative voice that felt like it could have come from anyone. Josh Trank, who directed 2015's Fantastic Four, went through an even more difficult time wrestling with his tortured film. The end result was a movie that satisfied nobody, least of all Trank. So far, the franchise has shied away from distinctive voices. We'll just have to see if Matt Shakman, who directed 2025's Fantastic Four, fares any better. In 1994, schlock legend Roger Corman co-produced a super low-budget Fantastic Four film, which was never even officially released. The acting was wonky and the special effects almost non-existent. But one thing the film did right is it leaned into the wildly creative and bizarre world of the Fantastic Four comics. But the three big budget adaptations that followed all seemed afraid to get funky. In the pages of Marvel Comics, the Fantastic Four engaged in thrilling adventures. They traveled to pocket universes and alternate dimensions while battling aliens, time travelers, mutants, and witches. But the film shied away from the franchise's more far-fetched elements, replacing all the fun, stylized comic book shenanigans with generic action and tedious CGI. Nothing symbolizes this more than the decision to turn Galactus into an angry cloud instead of showing him as the giant planet-devouring colossus of the comics. That's at least one mistake the makers of the 2025 Fantastic Four seem to have learned from. Ironically, by trying to make the characters more palatable to mainstream audiences, the filmmakers of the previous three versions stripped away everything interesting about the universe. And if there's one thing audiences don't like, it's being bored. In the comics, the Fantastic Four set the tone for the whole Marvel universe, establishing a new superhero dynamic rather than copying other characters. But in the movies, it's been the opposite, as the derivative Fantastic Four films have tried so hard to emulate other movies that audiences couldn't even tell them apart from past superior blockbusters. For the Fantastic Four films of the 2000s, the idea was to capture the magic of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man entries. Those titles, though, ooze sincerity and visual imagination, perhaps in part because Raimi was a self-avowed superfan of the comics. His films were a labor of love, while the Fantastic Four movies just seemed to be laborious. Meanwhile, 2015's Fantastic Four followed in the footsteps of Batman Begins and Casino Royale by offering a grittier relaunch. Those films were hits, sure, but lots of other gritty origin story remakes were flops like 2010's Robin Hood. The lesson, chasing trends is a good way to fall behind, while telling good stories is the best way to stay ahead. There's been a lot of chatter about superhero fatigue, to the point that you may now have superhero fatigue from talking about it so much. But even as far back as 2005, the Fantastic Four films have struggled to stand out against a slate of better superhero movies. 2005's Fantastic Four was dramatically undercut by the November 2004 release of The Incredibles, which heavily drew on the Fantastic Four for inspiration, only it did it much better. And Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins opened just 3 weeks before Fantastic Four, stealing even more of the team's thunder.
It's clobbering time!
It's catchy, right?
2 summers later, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer entered a movie-going landscape where fellow Marvel Comics adaptation Spider-Man 3 was the #1 movie of the year domestically. Then there was August 2015's Fantastic Four, which opened 3 weeks after Ant-Man. Though one of the lowest grossing Marvel Studios titles domestically, Ant-Man still more than tripled the North American gross of Fantastic Four. The big lesson here, it's hard to stand out in a crowd when everyone in the crowd is better looking than you. What's a good superhero movie without a memorable villain? It's a trick question. There aren't any really good superhero movies without memorable villains. Think about your favorites, like Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, Josh Brolin's Thanos, or Heath Ledger's Joker. Villains and the way they play off the heroes are vital to making a good superhero movie. And then there are the Fantastic Four films. Perhaps the most maddening thing about them is that they have Dr. Doom, arguably the greatest supervillain in all of Marvel Comics, and they somehow completely squander him time and time again. The 2 Tim Story directed features, for example, gave us a watered-down version of Doom barely worth remembering. The only saving grace is that he wasn't ruined quite as badly as Cloud Galactus. 2015's Fantastic Four was somehow even worse in the way it wasted Victor Von Doom. Not only did this version of Doom have no personality or menace, his design was also laugh-worthy. And the movie didn't even bother having any supervillains at all until the final act. The heightened unreality of superhero films means that actors and screenwriters can go full ham in bringing baddies to life. Folks love watching characters like Cate Blanchett's Hela chew the scenery. It's past time the Fantastic Four franchise allowed Doom to take a bite. Before 2016's Deadpool even hit theaters, people were hyped for the film thanks to an irreverent marketing campaign. Viral word-of-mouth marketing is absolute gold for studios looking to recoup the bloated budgets of these mega blockbusters. And that's where Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer's Try Hard campaign went wrong. Their big idea? Stamp the Silver Surfer on select US quarters. Just think of it, every time a kid pops a quarter into the local Dragon's Lair console, they'll see the face of the Silver Surfer. It would have been the perfect viral campaign for 1983. Unfortunately, it was ruled literally illegal by the US Mint, testing the idea that any publicity is good publicity. And this snafu encapsulated how the various Fantastic Four movies have been constantly derailed by poorly planned out marketing campaigns. 2015's Fantastic Four had an especially bamboozling one, with elements like a Denny's tie-in menu undercutting the ominous tone conveyed by the film's trailers. And speaking of trailers, while films like Logan or even the original Suicide Squad were pumped up by hot trailers, the 21st century Fantastic Four films had paint-by-numbers trailers that hinted at paint-by-numbers movies. If the Fantastic Four are ever going to get over, they need to get their marketing together. Otherwise, they will remain the superhero equivalent of fetch.
Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Budgets for superhero films have ballooned out of control over the decades. And when it comes to the box office, the Fantastic Four franchise has been a victim of its own failure. 2005's Fantastic Four had a reasonable $87.5 million budget, which ensured it would turn a profit on a $330 million worldwide haul. With the sequel, though, accountants across Hollywood learned that bigger is not always better. Rise of the Silver Surfer cost 50% more than its predecessor with a $130 million budget, but it only brought in $289 million worldwide, and no amount of silly product placement could save it. A bigger budget with smaller returns meant the end of the franchise. So you would have thought that the 2015 reboot might have taken this lesson into account, but you would have thought wrong. 2015's Fantastic Four cost $155 million to produce, a bigger budget than the same summer's Ant-Man. Add in distribution and marketing costs, and it's estimated the Fantastic Four needed to earn at least $395 million worldwide to be profitable, a lot more than the 2005 film's high water mark for the franchise. You can guess what happened. The 2015 Fantastic Four only brought in $167 million worldwide, making it an abject financial failure by every metric. 2010 superhero titles like Shazam or Venom showed that you could make these movies for much more modest prices, but Fantastic Four set money on fire like it was Johnny Storm.
Flame on!